Speculating about upcoming licensed chapters is fun. You can say it's not for you, that you don't do it all that much, but the fact remains that this type of speculation is one of the DBD community's favorite pastimes, and it's unlikely to go anywhere anytime soon. But, of course, not all licensed content is created the same, and sometimes variations offer unique opportunities. In the past, Behavior has called its DLC either chapters or paragraphs, with chapters coming with at least one killer, one survivor, and either a map or an entirely new realm, while paragraphs would only consist of one of those elements. Early examples of paragraphs include licenses like Left 4 Dead, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Ash vs. Evil Dead. Over time, however, Behavior decided to ditch the paragraph moniker and rename all of their old content. This saw Left Behind, the DLC that brought Bill Overbeck into the game, get renamed from Paragraph 1 to Chapter 3.5, for example. In spite of this surface level change, Dead by Daylight absolutely still releases paragraphs, with more recent examples such as Season of the Witch and Hellraiser, neither of which came close to constituting a full chapter by the standards of what a chapter used to be. Now, we could speculate over why Behavior made this change if they weren't serious about it, and to be blunt, there's a generous way to read it and a much less generous way to read it. I'm not looking to get lost in the weeds of semantics though, so I'll just suffice it to say that the devs had their reasons. In spite of the change, I rather like the concept of paragraphs and would encourage Behavior to continue making them, while licenses like It, Friday the 13th, and Alien would only really reach their full potential if given an entire chapter. We're talking survivors, killers, maps, the whole shebang. Some properties simply don't require that much space. Some work much better by simply bringing in a single iconic character and not bothering with reaching full quote-unquote chapter status, which, again, they're gonna do by default now anyway. While there are tons of great paragraph candidates, I picked 5 of my personal favorites and tossed them on a list. There really wasn't much in the way of rules for this list, save for the fact that the property had to be at least somewhat adjacent to horror, even though one of these I already break that rule, so I guess that rule's not even really there. But I was pretty lenient with everything, because again, this is all for fun. All of that being said, let's kick things off with number 1, Mortal Kombat, which would be represented by the main antagonist of the series, Shao Kahn. A couple of things right off the bat here. Firstly, Mortal Kombat is definitely not a horror series, but it is a series known for excessive brutality and unparalleled violence, so it does fit nicely in a game where the main goal is throwing human beings on meat hooks. Secondly, yes, I called Shao Kahn the main antagonist of the Mortal Kombat series. If you are under the impression that such a title belongs to Shinnok or some one-off bad guy, this is the part where I remind you that being wrong is not a crime, but you should still stop trying to do it so much. In many ways, Shao Kahn would be perfect for Dead by Daylight. His hammer is iconic and would make for a perfect weapon. The thought of him slamming that thing down on breakable walls and generators, it's enough to make anybody smile. And when I think about that hammer hitting a teabagging, clicky-clicky Legacy Dwight, well, like I said, it's all smiles here. Kahn would also be great for his voice lines, particularly because he'd be the first character to tell your opponents they suck before even reaching the post-game chat. And for those of you worried that such voice lines might make things a little toxic around these parts, yeah, you're right. I sure would hate for Dead by Daylight to have a toxic community. Obviously, Shao Kahn would have to have one of the best Moris in the game. In fact, given his pedigree for creative murder, his paragraph would be the perfect time to introduce a long-desired part of the shop where we can buy new Moris for each killer. If a Mortal Kombat paragraph isn't thematically perfect enough for such an announcement, then I truly don't know what is. The reason this makes for a better paragraph than chapter is that, to be blunt, while Mortal Kombat has tons of great heroes, none of them really belong here. I don't want to see characters like Liu Kang, Johnny Cage, and Sub-Zero here, just because their inclusion really wouldn't make sense. Perhaps they could go with a fully human character like Sonya Blade, but even then, she kicks way too much ass to be wrestled down by a high schooler with a knife, entity helping or not. A map would be a welcome addition for this chapter, preferably somewhere in Outworld, maybe the Coliseum from the more recent games, but that would be entirely optional. Outworld and other MK locations simply aren't as desirable as places like Camp Crystal Lake or the Overlook Hotel. Khan would be a really solid candidate for legendary cosmetics, but he's also a bit of a tricky case. I mean, after all, his immense frame means you can't just throw a scorpion skin on him and call it a day, but I suppose they could always try to work in larger characters like Goro or Onaga. Given the shocking amount of furries that play Dead by Daylight, I feel like a Kentaro skin might also do rather well. Lastly for this paragraph, they would absolutely have to change the load-in screen like they did for Resident Evil. As cool as it was hearing the Resi voice say, Dead by Daylight, it would be even cooler to hear it yell, Dead by Daylight, and let the classic synth hit. Again, I know this is just fanboy material, but man, it'd be cool. At number 2, we have a Survivor paragraph, this one belonging to Scream and introducing Sidney Prescott into the game. We already have Ghostface, and while I love Scream to the point of making an entire video talking about how much the series means to me, we actually have a better situation with a non-Scream Ghostface, so I don't want to change that. Working with Funworld has allowed Dead by Daylight tons of leeway regarding Ghosty's appearance and lore, so again, why fix what's not broken? Still, Sidney Prescott is the best final girl in the history of horror, and not having her in the fog is a bit of a disappointment. To get around this, all Behavior has to do is reach an agreement with the current rights holders to bring Sidney into the game as a lone character, one likely equipped with legendary cosmetics that can turn her into Gale Weathers and Dewey Riley. Of course, I say that like it's an easy thing, but it's really not. Getting the rights to Sidney Prescott means getting the rights to Neve Campbell's likeness. While Neve seems like a lovely person, she's not currently on great terms with the Scream intellectual property, seeing as they dropped her from Scream 6 after she turned down what she believed to be a lowball offer to return to the series. If the rumors are true, then Campbell was treated like she was expendable and she's not likely jazzed by the thought of making Scream even more money. If these issues could be worked out, however, Sidney would make for an ideal addition to the game. She's smart, resilient, and in control in a way that most final girls simply weren't before her. I always hate that when people talk about some kind of lack of strong female characters, she tends to get left out of the conversation, because honestly, I think she was a real trailblazer for slasher films in many ways. I know every horror fan has their favorite final girl, but for me, mine will always be Sidney. And I'm not alone in that opinion either. Scream is enduringly popular, in no small part thanks to Prescott, and if DBD truly wants to be the smash of horror, then she's more than earned her seat at the table. But, of course, nobody will argue as to whether or not Sidney Prescott is a horror icon. The number 3 entry may prove more divisive, however, as I'd love to see another paragraph add 2 survivors from Until Dawn in the form of Sam Giddings and Mike Monroe. In many ways, your opinion of Until Dawn is a good insight into what you like from horror. The game lovingly embraces the corniness of 80s slasher films and features a cast of characters more or less created to represent established stereotypes. The jock, the nerd, the, bitch. The game is a celebration of cheesy horror movies, and because of that, not everyone's gonna like it. It did create a pretty massive fan base upon release though, and likely would have been an even bigger deal if it didn't go the anti-consumer route and limit itself to one console, the PlayStation 4. Still, it hit the mainstream at the right time in that Let's Plays were still big on YouTube, meaning millions of people are familiar with the game despite never getting the chance to play it. With a big fan base like that, it would work great in Dead by Daylight. Of course, as is always the case with licenses, there are snags. Namely that Until Dawn was developed by Sony, and for those who don't know, Sony really sucks at sharing. While they're not as blatantly anti-consumer as Nintendo, they're not far behind. They do, of course, love money, so who knows, maybe they'd make an exception. Microsoft owning Call of Duty may actually be enough reason for Sony to play nice for the time being, but again, there's no telling. If Behavior were able to navigate the Sony minefield, they could add Sam and Mike to the game and start printing money immediately. I chose Sam and Mike because they feel like the game's unofficial main characters. I mean, Sam's entire stereotype is that of the already discussed final girl, but there would definitely need to be skins for the other characters as well. I'd like to see Sam come with skins that turn her into Ash, best girl, and Jess, while Mike could turn into Matt and Chris. I didn't add Josh because Rami Malek might be too expensive to acquire the likeness of, as well as story reasons, and I didn't add Emily because, I mean, if I'm being honest, I just can't stand her, but if they have to add her, fine, go for it. No need to add the Winter Lodge as a map, or the Wendigo as a killer, Ormond is rather similar to the Washington's cabin, and Hag is already pretty closely based on a Wendigo, so both of those additions would feel redundant, I feel. Speaking of redundancy, let's use number 4 to mention a character I've already lobbied for in a past video, that being one of Lord of the Rings' Nazgul. I try not to reuse content if I can help it, but the channel is much larger than it used to be, and I'm willing to die on this hill. Now, it does need to be acknowledged up front, I am a massive Tolkien nerd. I've read The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the Silmarillion. I know these stories inside and out. One of my favorite subgenres on YouTube is the channels that take deep dives into the history and lore of Middle-earth. You show me a video about what Faramir's favorite bedtime snack was, then I'm gonna watch it. And even though recent efforts in this franchise have been just awful, I still love the original works, no matter how much the Hobbit trilogy and Rings of Power try to ruin them. Addressing the largest complaint this one is certain to get, I will be straight up and acknowledge that no, Lord of the Rings is not a horror franchise at all. In fact, it's not even horror adjacent. That being said, I am of the opinion that nearly every scene involving the Black Riders in the Fellowship was presented pretty closely to a horror film, and there's just no denying that the Nazgul are scary, and by design. One thing I'd love to see is behavior creating their own lore for one of the Nazgul, seeing as though we know basically nothing about any of them besides the Witch King of Angmar. They were rulers of men, they were given rings of power, they were corrupted, and they now serve Sauron. That leaves a lot of room for the devs to create some additional lore, though it would obviously have to be non-canon. We did just get the Knight, so it might be too soon for this chapter, but I still think it works. Plus, the rights would be easier than ever to get, seeing as though Umbrella Corp, Amazon, now owns the rights, and I don't know if you gamers have heard or not, but Amazon loves money. Like Mr. Krabs type of loving money. Plus, they've shown a real interest in getting into games as late with projects like the universally loved and not at all hated New World, as well as Prime Gaming, so something like this would be absolutely possible. Skins wouldn't be too hard to come up with for this character. Give it a unique base skin, one that's, of course, just unique to Dead by Daylight, a typical Black Rider skin, talking about the big hood where you can't see the face, and then legendaries that turn it into the Witch King or Sauron, or both. Hey, both, why not? You could even go a step further and give it an Uruk-hai skin, preferably the Berserker, because I just think it looks really cool. But I don't want to ask for too much here. If we get anything Lord of the Rings, I'll be happy. As with all of these, there's just no need to make this one a full chapter, seeing as though it wouldn't feel right to be throwing a member of the Fellowship on a hook or anything like that, though they could always go with some kind of, brand new Gondorian character or something like that. I wouldn't hate that, but at the same time, I think this one probably works better as a chapter. As a paragraph. And closing this one out, we are going to move on to number 5, Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. I know this movie has entered into a bit of a weird place in recent times, given the popularity of the Sigma Bale memes and the wider discourse around the film's messages. But I would hate it if a couple of memes and bad faith takes actually soiled people's opinions on what remains a genuinely enjoyable film. At the end of the day, American Psycho is funny, disturbing, incisive, and ultimately one of the best horror films of the 2000s. And while there are certainly a lot of things to like about the film, Christian Bale undoubtedly takes the cake. He kills it, in this role, and truly elevates the character's popularity to cult status. I don't know if it would be possible for behavior to afford Bale's likeness, but doing so would be pivotal in making this paragraph work. Because while some people are huge proponents of the book, two facts remain. The first is that the licenses are brought into DBD to bring new eyes to the product, and the second is that far more people are familiar with the Patrick Bateman of the movie than the Patrick Bateman of the book. I am not making an argument of quality, so please put the pitchforks down. I am just making an argument of good business, which Bateman himself would probably appreciate. Bateman has no shortage of quotable lines, many of which would do well to be repurposed into add-ons or perks. Obviously, his business card would have to be involved somehow, though I can't think of a logical way that they work that into his power. Speaking of the power, Bateman was just a normal human being, so I'm not entirely sure what his power would look like. Maybe they could just make it where he builds a power like Myers or Nimmy, but this time he peaks after finally managing to get into Dorsia, and his power is just unleashed. I'd expect Bateman to use an axe as a weapon, but you could just as easily make a case for a knife. For my taste, DBD has enough knife-wielding maniacs, but I guess another one wouldn't hurt. His terror radius could be where the real fun starts. It would need to hint at hip to be square to some degree, though I think that it would be asking too much to actually have the Huey Lewis hit be included in the game. It would be amazing though if he was, when he's nearby, you just hear hip, hip, so hip to be square, getting louder and louder, because that would be oddly menacing in its own right. Bateman would also benefit greatly from being one of the few killers with voice lines. I'd love for there to be unique lines where he mimics the famous, "Hey Paul," but instead substitutes the names like Dwight, Elodie, Yoichi. He could also wish recently downed survivors good luck getting reservations at Dorsia now. In short, this paragraph would be a world of fun, and while I don't think it needs a fully fleshed out chapter, though I wouldn't be mad at all at having Willem Dafoe in the game, I do think it would be a tremendous get for DBD. As already mentioned, Dead by Daylight is aiming to be the smash of horror, and whether you love him or hate him, there's no denying that Patrick Bateman is an icon. He's also, allegedly, the American Psycho.
Patrick, it's you! You're the American Psycho!
But that's gonna do it for me. I hope you enjoyed this one. Please, put your thoughts on these entries down below in the comments and also suggest paragraph characters that you would like to see. If I get enough comments, I might do a follow-up video where I just put your suggestions and give my thoughts on that. Thanks again for watching, and I hope that wherever you are having a lovely day, night, evening, whatever time it is, and I hope that you are good. But all of that being said, until next time, I've been Das Food. Bye, friends.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase bitterness in my